Hello everyone. This is video 2 of class 7. This video will go through some problems very similar to the problems that are in your homework assignment because I want you to be able to make sure you get those concepts and you don't struggle with your homework. I've set this up in Excel, and if you remember, we're in chapter 8, it's planning and budgeting. And we've talked already about what a static budget is, a flexible budget, and an actual budget. If you recall, a static budget is all the revenue budgets, the statistical budget, and the cost budget all put together. It's the standard and the estimated volume and standard cost we're going to have, and what our revenue would be per visit or activity that we have. And then our actual results are just that, the actual results that we achieved for that time period of the budget. And the flexible budget, the flexible budget takes the actual volume, but at the standard cost. So let's get into some of our problems that we're going to have. They're very similar again, that we're going to be assigned in our homework. Okay, so here's our Excel sheet. We want to consider the following results of the following hospital. Note, amounts are in millions. Okay, so we have three different rows. We have the revenue, and we have the revenue amount for our static, flexible, and actual results. Our costs for, again, all three budgets, and our profits. And remember, our profit is just our revenue minus our costs. What I've done also to make it a little easier, I've put just some column headings A, B, and C, so that when we go in and we calculate these variances, it'll make it a little easier. And remember, variances are how much did we change from what we thought we were going to do. And putting the budget together is one thing, but then after that, it's really much more about seeing how we did and measuring our results, and then trying to take activities that will improve our results, because we need to know where we thought we would be and where we ended up, and then how we can continue to do better. Okay, so let's start with this. The first problem is to calculate the profit variance. Now remember, profit variance is our static budget versus our actual budget. And the first step we do is to determine if it is favorable or unfavorable. So let's see here. We thought we'd have a profit of 0.8. We actually had a profit of 0.7. So that would be unfavorable. So I would recommend you just do that and just indicate it as unfavorable. Now, the variance amount would be, and I've even put it here for you, column C minus column A. So let's do this in Excel. And for those of you that are getting used to Excel, you can watch it and get benefit out of this. So I would take column minus, and we get an unfavorable result. Okay. Now, the reason this is blocked out here is because down here we've got two variances that we'll be calculating, so we put the results in here, so don't get confused with that. So our profit was unfavorable. Now let's calculate our revenue variance. Remember, revenue is up here, and let's look at what our variance is. First thing to determine is, was it favorable or unfavorable? Well, we thought we'd have 7.8. We had revenue of 8. So I would say that is favorable. So we'll record that as favorable. And do the same thing here. Put in a little formula. And it would be this minus column. And we have a 0.2 favorable. Now the next question is, calculate the cost variance. Well, here's the cost. We had a budgeted 7 million in cost. We ended up at 7.3 million. So we had more cost than we had budgeted. That would be, yes, unfavorable. And now unfavorable are always in brackets. It's negative. Now you'll notice that we have to take, if we look at the costs, we have to take the static budget cost this time to get our unfavorable minus our actual result to get our unfavorable balance. Okay, now you'll notice that the profit variance is the total of the revenue variance plus the cost variance. So here was our profit variance of minus minus 0.1. If you put these two together, you can see that they equal minus 0.1 because the profit variance is this variance plus this variance. So 0.2 plus a minus 0.3 gives us the negative 0.1. Now let's go and calculate the volume and price variance on revenue. Now remember, volume variance is the difference between the static and the flexible budget, and the price variance is the difference between the flexible and the actual budget. So let's calculate. Let's do the volume variance right here and on revenue and see if it's favorable or unfavorable. Well, we thought we would have revenue of 7.8, but the static budget was 7.5. So that is unfavorable. Record that. And now let's take a look at that. It would be column B minus column A. This minus this. We get an unfavorable volume variance. Okay, so that means we did not record as many visits, if that's what we had, or hospital stays, as we thought we would in our budget. Now let's look at the price variance. Okay, price variance on revenue is the flexible budget compared to the actual budget. Well, the flex budget was 7.5, and the actual was paid. I would say that's a favorable variance. Okay. And let's go ahead and calculate it. It would be, let's see, and there we go, 0.5 favorable variance because of price. Now what does that mean? That means that on the volume that we had, we were able to have more, get a greater price than we had anticipated in the budget. Now you'll notice, if you take, this was our total revenue variance. If you take our volume variance plus our price variance will equal our revenue variance. Okay, next we're going to calculate our volume and management variance. Now we'll talk about what management variance is in a second, but let's just go through it, through the formulas and calculate it. Now remember, the first thing is to determine if the variance was favorable or unfavorable. So let's look at this, and we're doing volume first. Here's our cost. We thought we would have 7 million. We ended up with 6.9 million. So I would say that we had less cost than we had anticipated. That would be a favorable variance. So I'd like to record that first, and then we know that has to be a positive. So it would be our static minus our flexible, giving us a positive 0.1 variance. Now let's look at it on the cost side. Sorry, on the managerial variance on the cost side. Flexible budget was 6.9. The actual results was 7.3. That would be an unfavorable variance. Or that. And now it would be actual, and that's 0.4. Now, remember, managerial variance is called managerial variance on the cost price side because it's determined that probably managers could do something about influencing that variance. They could have not paid staff as much. They could have been a little bit more efficient on some of the costs that they had. That's why they call it managerial variance. Also, you will notice that here was our cost variance. It was a negative variance, an unfavorable variance of 0.3. And if you look at our volume and managerial variance, which is based on our cost variance, and you see that it was positive 0.1 and negative 0.4, those two together will equal our cost variance. And I'll just highlight that so that we make sure that we covered all that. So now we've gone through and calculated and done all the variances. You'll see a very similar problem to this in the book for homework. It won't be the same numbers, it will be the same concept. And you should have no problem in answering those questions. Now, the last part of this problem one is, how are these variances related? Well, as we went through this problem, I was giving you hints on that, and I've got a little thing, comment put in here to show you what we talked about. Go scan down a little so that we can see that. Okay. So it's just like we said earlier, profit variance is the revenue variance plus the cost variance, and we proved that out. And now the revenue variance is equal to the volume variance and the price variance, and the cost variance is equal to the volume variance and the managerial variance. See how they're all related, and that's very important things, because when you calculate this, well, it's calculate as far as trying to get the right answer. When you calculate this, you can double check and see if they equal what you thought they were supposed to. And then, of course, the real work is understanding what the variance is, and then drilling down and trying to interpret what you can do to make changes going forward. Like if you have the unfavorable revenue variance and it was due to volume, you can concentrate on the increasing volume and seeing what the impact of that would be. And it was obviously very good that you were able to get more per visit than you thought. Okay, so that is finishing up problem one. I'm not doing all the parts of all the problems, but I'm doing the major parts that I think will be very helpful in getting you to answer all the homework. So let's now move to problem two. Okay. Here's problem two. Now, problem two has a few twists in it. And I think they like to do this in the book to get you to think through and think things, make sure you're understanding the concepts just by making it slightly more difficult. And I know it drives some of you crazy, but it's probably a good thing because we're all here to learn. Now, in problem two, you'll see that just like this is set up, it's very similar to the problem two in the book. You'll see that all of a sudden they've got a static budget, and then they've got the flexible enrollment / utilization budget, and then a flexible enrollment budget, and then an actual budget. So all of a sudden you're seeing like these 4 budgets, and it's like, what's going on? How do I interpret these? What does this really mean? Well, don't worry. We're going to walk through because it's not as difficult or as you'll understand in a second. So how was this different from problem 1? Well, like we just said, it's got 2 flexible budgets. And the reason it has 2 flexible budgets is because there's 2 variables now with volume. When you see this, this is an indication that there's capitation. And remember, in capitation, we have 2 different things. We have fee-for-service and capitation. So all this is doing is showing you how much of the reason there's 2 is one is for the enrollment, the capitation budget, and the other one is the fee-for-service / utilization budget, so that you can flex them to see how much of it was volume and how much of it was price related to both those separate services. So it's really just doing the same thing except breaking it out into 2 pieces because there are 2 different variables with volume. Okay, so we're going to walk through calculating the variances, and I've actually left them on here because it's very, very similar to the problem we did, except we've got to understand the difference. There's a few differences on how you calculate some of the variances here. And then after we've done that, I'm going to unhide some columns I have so we can have a better understanding of really what's happening. Because the book doesn't do a very good job with that. They just want you to kind of almost memorize and know that there's more variances and they go deeper and deeper into your variances. But I thought it would be important to understand what those variances are instead of just trying to memorize them for those of you that are interested in those kind of things. Okay, so revenue variance. Well, first thing we do is we look at, first of all, this is all just on revenue. All these variances, again, are just on revenue. In the other problem, we had revenue and cost and profit. Okay, but this is just going to be with the revenue line. Static budget was 2125, and the actual results were 15. That we did not do as well as we thought we would. It's unfavorable. Now, unfavorable, we would take the actual results in column D, and I put a little symbols here, it's kind of directing you on what we're doing. So we're taking the actual results minus the static budget and getting an unfavorable variance of 62,500. Now, let's look at the volume variance. Remember, and I even put little things down here to explain a volume variance with these kinds of, we're going to take care of the enrollment utilization first. The volume variance is the flexible enrollment utilization revenue minus the static revenue. So B minus A. So first determine if it's favorable or unfavorable. Well, static was 212. The flex enrollment utilization was 100. It's unfavorable. And it's cell B minus A, giving us our unfavorable variance. Now let's see what our price variance is. Our price variance is the actual results minus the flexible enrollment utilization revenue. So we're just doing these 2 and these 2. Okay? Now, first, is it favorable? Well, we're taking our actual and comparing it to the flex enrollment. The revenue was higher, so it's favorable. So here's our calculation. D minus B, favorable. two together, here's our revenue variance of negative 62. Now we know that it was negative 62.5 because 112.5 was due to volume and 50 was positive on price. So these two numbers together, you can see added together right here, 62.5 equals that. Okay, excellent. Let's move down a little bit. And look at our price, our enrollment variance. Okay. Our enrollment variance is now over here, and we're going to take our flexible enrollment revenue versus our static. So this compared to this. First, we would determine that it's unfavorable. Then we go ahead and calculate it. So C minus A, we get of 112,500 unfavorable enrollment variance. And we're going to go into exactly what that means in a minute. Right now, it's just going through the calculations. The utilization variance is the flexible enrollment utilization here compared to the flexible enrollment. First, you can see we have 100 and we have 90, so it's favorable. And if you do the two together, you get the 10. Now, what these two variances are breaking up the volume variance to show how much of the volume variance was due to enrollment and how much of it was due to utilization. And if you'll notice, if you put these two together, we get our volume variance. So we're breaking out our volume variance. Now, this all seems a little confusing, and there's a lot more in the book on this. Now, I wouldn't say a lot more. They talk about, they have these formulas there for you. What they don't have is the stuff I'm about to show you, but you should, again, always make sure you've read the book and understand as best you can. And the homeworks make you go through and force you to try to understand it even at a deeper level. So a lot of these volume variances have a lot to do with what I'm about to show you. Let's go and unhide these. What I've done, notice that here's our total revenue, okay? This is calculated based on capitation revenue and fee-for-service revenue. And since we're doing volume variances, I want to show you what our volumes were in our assumptions versus how to get how much volume did we really change and what is really happening. So here we go. In our static budget, we had member months, 14,250, fee-for-service visits, 875. Now, capitated visits, we were anticipating 1,750 in our budget, or 1.47 per member. That's the number of visits per year we thought we would be getting from these capitated members up here. Capitated dollars per member month, it should say per member month, we thought we would get $10. Why don't I just add that per member month so that we're not confused. And then we thought we would get this, so this is the price amount. So we thought we'd get that much per member month, and we'd get this per fee-for-service visit. So this cell, you can see, is my member months times my capitated dollars per member month. And this is my fee-for-service revenue, which is just the number of visits times how much I thought I would get per visit. Let's jump over to our actual results. Now, these are big differences, and the obvious question is say, okay, we thought we'd have 14,250 member months, and we only ended up with 2,000. Something happened. Uh, Maybe a major contract didn't come through that we had budgeted for, but there was definitely a big problem. But we did have 2,000, and hopefully our variable costs, if they were true variable costs, would have dropped, would not be as much because they would be based on the number of visits we had. If we had a lot of, remember, if we had a lot of fixed costs, there's no way we're going to cover uh, all our fixed costs in anticipation probably of being able to service this many people, and we're going to have a big problem. But this is just on the revenue side. So we had fee-for-service visits were up by 1,000. I'm sorry, up to 1,000, so up by from 875. Now, capitated visits were down because we had very lot fewer people, member months, and the rate that they came in was higher. So we'll talk about that in a moment. We were under contract for $10, so we have no variance. We thought we would get $10 per member month according to our contract, and we got that $10 per member month. That's not saying that this couldn't have been different, but in our case, they are the same. And most of the time, you're locked into a contract and you're going to get that amount. So it's odd that it would change. Price per visit, we had anticipated 80, but we were getting 100. Well, we ended up getting 130. So we did better on our reimbursement per visit. You know, it's hard to say why. I don't know what they were doing in the static budget. Maybe they thought they were going to be budgeting for mid-level or nurse practitioner visits, and they ended up using an MD for the visits and were able to charge more. Of course, there would be more costs associated with that, but we're only dealing with the revenue right now. So now you'll notice what we have here in these two budgets. All we're doing here is in the flexible enrollment budget, we're putting in how many capitated months we actually had, and we're leaving the fee-for-service visits at our static budget, and we're letting this calculate out. Everything else is the same, and it's going to calculate for this amount. Over here, we're putting in the actual capitated because we want to show the difference between these two. We're going to now put in the fee-for-service visits that we actually had so we can see what our impact was for the change on fee-for-service. Now this helps explain variances below. It would be really good for you to go ahead and try to walk through the variances one more time, knowing this information up here. It'll help a lot in the problem that you're going to be doing. Although, actually, it'll help in understanding what you're doing with calculating the variances. The problem is actually going to be very simple because we've given you the answer on how to calculate the differences. All you have to do is make sure you know if it's favorable or unfavorable in the problem, and you'll be able to calculate it very easily. One little thing I want to note, with these capitated visits, you'll notice that visits, even though like this changed, we thought we were going to have 1.47 and we had 1.65 visits per member. It has no impact on the revenue at all because we are not compensated on a per visit basis with capitation. We're compensated on our member months. So our member months, we wouldn't be taking our visits times our anticipated number of visits to come up with some kind of revenue number. We'd always be taking our capitated member months times our $10 per member month. So we could have more visits or less visits. And the reason that's important to understand is not so much from the revenue side, although you could be able to say, you know, we thought we'd get X amount per visit based on this capitation payment per member month, and we got, because we saw many more visits, we saw a lot less. And would we be better off being on fee for service, or would we be better off staying at capitated? Now, the other thing, and that depends so much on the population that you're serving. If they're an unhealthy population, you'll be required to have more visits to keep them healthy, because that's per the contract. You can't limit the number of visits they have under a capitation contract, but you won't be compensated for it if there are more. So you have to be very careful in the negotiations. Where it can hurt you is, remember, we're going to have costs associated with all the visits, the variable costs. If you have a lot more visits under the capitation than you thought you'd have, you'll have a lot more variable cost. So that is it for problem 2. Next, we're going to move on to problem 3. Let's click over here. Now, problem 3 is a nice problem, and it's not set up exactly the way it is in the book, but what we're going to do is prepare the flexible budget. And what they do is they give you the flexible budget, and they ask you how come, or how did they calculate the flexible budget. Well, if we go ahead and prepare the flexible budget in this example, you'll understand how, obviously, they got to their flexible budget in the book. Excuse me. Okay, so remember, a static budget is standard costs, standard revenue per visit times a budgeted number of visits. The actual is the actual costs or actual revenue received per visit. And the flexible budget takes the actual number of visits times the standard costs. So in preparing the flexible budget, you first need to understand what the costs are per unit that you were doing in your static budget and what your actual was. So let's do that first. So number of surgeries, 1,500. Patient revenue. Okay, what I've done, make it a little simpler, I've hidden some rows. I'm going to unhide them now. See, all I've done is put these in so I didn't have to type them in when we were here doing this. So no big deal. Okay, so we've got to go ahead and calculate the revenue per unit on our static and our actual before we'll be able to do our flexible. So revenue per unit. Let's see here. We know we have this much revenue, 3,000. We know we have 1,500 surgery. So we'll divide the 3,000 by the 1,500 and get 2. So that's what we're getting per surgery. And these numbers are in thousands, let's just say. Okay. And at least the revenue numbers are in thousands. Okay. So we'll do 1,500 surgeries, but at 2,000. We'll just leave it all like these numbers to make it all simple so we don't get caught up in just adding large numbers. So did you see that formula? All we did was take static, the revenue, divided by the number of visits, or the number of surgeries, excuse me. Now let's take the salary expense. Now this is assuming, I think in this, they assume that both of them are variable costs, but it really doesn't matter. Okay, now we're going to take, if that's the salary expense, and it's variable cost, we're saying, we can just say it's going to have an impact per visit or per surgery. So we're going to take the salary divided by the number of surgeries and cost 1 per surgery, $1 per surgery to perform a salary. Now let's do the same thing for non-salary expenses because it's assumed as variable. We'll take the 750 divided by the number of surgeries. We get 750. There we go. Now, So now we know what the standard costs were for what we thought we'd get in revenue per surgery, what we thought the salary price would be per surgery, and the non-salary cost per surgery. Now, we can just make our life simple, copy these formulas right across so that we'll have them there. And don't worry about that. That'll go away in a moment. See, all I'm doing is grabbing the corner and pulling it, and that copies it, okay? And I'll make this all blue again. There we go. Oops. Perfectionist. We'll do that. So remember, the flexible budget takes the actual volume, the actual number of surgeries by the standard units. So here, we'll just can do one thing. We'll put in the number right there. Okay. Now, here, we'll put in, so this has to be the patient revenue, again, would be the actual number of surgeries times the standard or the static budget revenue per unit. So we'll go the actual number of surgeries, multiply it by what we thought we would be getting. Yeah, that gives us this as patient revenue. Now, it's the same thing with the salary. We're going to take the actual number of surgeries, multiply it by our standard of $1, and we get our total salary expense out of our flexible budget. And we'll do it one more time. Our budget, which is our actual volume, multiply it by our standard, and there we go. And remember, profit is simply our revenue minus our two costs, and we'll go like that. Take our revenue minus our salary expense minus our non-salary expense. There we go. Oh, there. That is how we calculated our flexible budget. And then, of course, from there, we can do all our variances. Okay? So that answers that, and you need to understand how that was done in order to answer the third problem in the book. Another piece of the book is determine the profit variance as a whole dollar amount and as a percent. Well, profit variance. Here's our variance. Remember, profit variance is the difference between what we thought we were doing and what we got. First thing you always do is determine, was it favorable or unfavorable? Well, we had planned to get 750. We actually got 480. I would say that's unfavorable. So let's mark that as unfavorable. Now the problem says, give us that unfavorable amount as a calculation, as a whole dollar calculation. Well, okay, it's the actual minus the static, it's an unfavorable 270. And it says, also show it as a percent. How much of a percent variance was it? Well, that would just be our variance divided by our static. We have a negative 36% variance. Now, it comes out like negative 0.36. In Excel, you can very easily, just by clicking this little thing here, change it to a percent, and we'll add that like that. There you go. So that's how you calculate the percent changes. And there's a lot of that in the third problem. Again, I haven't answered all components of the third problem, but I've given you the harder parts, and you're going to have to figure out the rest. But between your readings in the book, our presentation from video 1, and this presentation, I think you'll have no problem doing that. I hope this was helpful, and see you in video 3 as we start some of the next chapter.